slavery in the Americas was not merely an economic system, it was a ritualized apparatus of racial supremacy, built on the systematic degradation of black bodies and psyches. Yet mainstream narratives have sanitized its brutality, reducing centuries of terror to textbook euphemisms like forced labor or peculiar institution. This whitewashing is not accidental, it is a continuation of the original violence, a cultural gaslighting that obscures the soul wounds inflicted on generations. To speak truthfully about slavery is to confront the grotesque, the unspeakable, and the mythic. It is to name the rituals of domination, cannibalism, sexual abuse, child exploitation, and psychological warfare, not for shock, but for sovereignty. This article is a reckoning. Historical sanitization has long served to obscure the true nature of slavery. Textbooks often portray it as a regrettable but necessary economic system, omitting the ritualized violence and psychological torment that defined daily life for the enslaved. Museums and monuments frequently center the benevolence of slaveholders, erasing the agency and resistance of the enslaved. Films and media dilute the horror, focusing on redemption arcs rather than systemic brutality. This cultural amnesia is reinforced by persistent myths, the kind master, the happy slave, propagated during Reconstruction to justify Jim Crow laws and racial segregation. Whitewashing serves to preserve national innocence, shielding institutions from accountability and allowing the machinery of racial supremacy to persist under new guise. Slavery was not just labor, it was a ritual of degradation, enacted daily to reinforce racial hierarchy. Among the most grotesque practices was cannibalism. While rare documented cases exist of enslaved individuals being murdered and consumed by slaveholders or overseers as acts of terror, in one harrowing account, a man was killed, his heart and liver eaten, and his limbs fed to others with risa, grotesque inversion of communion, turning nourishment into domination. These acts were not merely physical, they were symbolic, designed to obliterate identity and instill fear. Equally horrifying was the use of enslaved children as bait for alligator hunting. Southern folklore and newspaper ads document this practice, in which children were tied near swamps, left crying until predators approached, and then dragged away as hunters fired. This was not just cruelty, it was a ritual of expendability, reducing black children to tools of profit and sport. The commodification of black bodies extended to sexual violence and forced reproduction. Enslaved women were routinely raped, not only by slaveholders but by overseers and guests. Breeding farms existed where women were forced to bear children for sale, often paired with male slaves like livestock. Girls as young as 10 were subjected to sexual abuse, their bodies commodified before puberty. Enslaved men were also victims subjected to sexual humiliation, forced copulation, and genital mutilation. Psychological warfare was a constant. Enslaved individuals were denied literacy, family bonds, and spiritual autonomy. Punishments were public, designed to instill terror in witnesses. Names were stripped and replaced with demeaning monikers, erasing ancestral identity and severing ties to lineage and culture. These rituals of dehumanization were not incidental, they were foundational to the mythic architecture of racial supremacy. White supremacy was not just ideology, it was a mythic system, complete with rituals, symbols, and archetypes. Slaveholders positioned themselves as gods, dispensers of life, death, and punishment. The plantation became a microcosm of divine rule, with the enslaved caste as subhuman, soulless, or cursed. Biblical justifications, such as the curse of Ham, were weaponized to sanctify domination. Renaming enslaved individuals was a form of spiritual erasure. Names like boy, mammy, or sambo were not just insults, they were archetypal roles imposed to control behavior and identity. Punishments were performed publicly, often with ritualistic precision. Whippings, brandings, and mutilations mirrored ancient rites of sacrifice, reinforcing the slaveholder's power and the enslaved person's disposability. Survivor testimonies offer living archives of this brutality. Harriet Jacobs, in Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, describes hiding in an attic crawlspace for 7 years to escape sexual abuse. Her narrative exposes the psychological toll of slavery, especially for women. Frederick Douglass recounts being beaten, starved, and denied education, yet he taught himself to read and became a leading abolitionist. His life is a testament to the mythic archetype of the wounded healer. Solomon Northup, kidnapped and sold into slavery, wrote 12 Years a Slave, detailing the brutality of plantation life and the fragility of black freedom. These testimonies are not just historical, they are sacred texts, encoded with survivor wisdom and mythic truth. To move forward, we must reframe slavery's legacy through survivor-centered sovereignty. Survivors of slavery are not merely victims, they are oracles, warriors, and healers. Their stories carry codes of discernment, resistance, and transformation. Naming the wound is the first act of sovereignty. Slavery was a ritual of racial supremacy, enacted through cannibalism, sexual violence, and child exploitation. To heal, we must create new rituals of remembrance, truth-telling, and empowerment. Survivor-centered frameworks can guide education, policy, and cultural healing. Whitewashing is a second violence. It silences the screams, erases the rituals, and protects the perpetrators. But truth is a ritual to end. When spoken with reverence, it becomes a shield. To honor the enslaved is to tell the whole story. To protect survivors is to dismantle the myth of supremacy. And to heal is to build new mythologies where truth is sacred and sovereignty is restored.